welcome to all you TLBTV viewers out there. I'm your host, Lorana Hoops. You've joined us for another edition of Write the World, the show where we speak to all sorts of different authors and writers. We bring you some great books to read, and of course, we learn about some of the tricks of the trade as we go along. This show is brought to you by TLBTV and the Liberty Beacon Project, and I'm super excited. Tonight, my guest is a fellow indie author. This is Randy Weir. Why don't you guys say hello, and how are you doing today, Randy?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. It's getting close to Christmas, and I realized I haven't started shopping yet, so that stressed me out a little bit today, but otherwise I'm good.
Didn't do all that online shopping, huh? Like everyone else on Black Friday and Cyber Monday, huh?
You know, I should have, and I think I was trying to write, and I was suffering from like back pain, and my husband and I both got sick over Thanksgiving weekend, so
Yuck.
slipped my mind. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm super excited to talk to you tonight because I don't think that I have interviewed anyone who writes detective stories in the past. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started writing this series, and of course a little bit about the series themselves.
Sure. The series actually started with a short story I wrote about 20 years ago, showing my age. And I had written actually 3 other novels of totally different, they were kind of a CIA suspense thriller back in the 80s, I think it was 80s, 90s, somewhere in there. Time goes so quickly. And they never were published. So, you know, they kind of, they're still in a filing cabinet here in paper with a typewriter, and, you know, before you had personal computers, so it was a lot harder than to type. I had an old manual typewriter. So, but I wrote a short story called The Case of the Missing Bubblegum Card, with kind of a snarky detective named Jarvis Mann. And he was helping a young high school student find a stolen Ernie Banks bubblegum card, which was worth a lot of money, worth even more now. Then it was worth a lot. So he helps the young man, goes around, and, you know, it got put on a piece of paper and, you know, digitally old, I think it was on AMI Pro, was the word processor I used in those days. I was old enough to remember those early word processors before Word became the dominant word processor. I decided to update it, you know, when independent publishing became more prevalent. And it was one of those things my wife wrote, and she said, you really ought to try to publish this. It's really good. So I updated it because it was a little out of date with the players and who was playing at the time and everything. And found some beta readers, and they read it, and several of the beta readers said, you know, if you would make a good detective series, you know, you really ought to go. And I actually had started another story with the same detective, helping a woman who was being stalked. And that turned into the first novel in the series, Tracking a Shadow. So that's kind of where it's gone. That was in 2014 when I first published the first short story, which is free on Amazon permanently, so anyone can pick it up anytime. And kind of went from there. And he kind of evolved, and it's a local detective. I live in Denver, the Denver area, and so he's a local detective here, getting himself into trouble. You know, nothing's ever as it appears to be, as in most mysteries. You know, everybody's, you know, whoever you think is on his side, it may not be on his side. And he has kind of a witty sense of humor, gets himself into trouble. You know, all the normal detective stuff. You know, he's not very good with his relationships. You know, that's also common with most of these detectives. You know, they're usually in and out of relationships, and he kind of follows out a lot of those past detectives, but kind of in a modern way. And hopefully, I make him entertaining.
Did you find it a hard shift to go from short stories to novels when you first started writing the first novel?
I did, and I think the first novel, there's a lot of filler kind of early on. You know, if you're trying to make it long enough, there's really going to be a novel. And I've gotten you know, better at that. You know, I went back and rewritten the first novel a little bit too, so it's not quite it starts a little bit slower. But yeah, it was difficult. Though I will say with the short stories, sometimes it's hard to keep them short.
Right.
Yeah. And I have one other short story which came out in July, and it's actually a Christmas short story, the same detective, and that was the latest one in the series, called The Case of the Invisible Souls. And it's a little bit longer. It's about 16,000 words. It's about 50-some pages. So it's kind of one of those, it's a short story, novella. I don't know what the cutoff line is there for that. So it's about twice as long as the original one. And I know some people read it, they really liked it, but they're like, well, it probably could have been a full book if you really wanted to stretch it out. I felt like that was about the right limit, and it was a good holiday, simple, kind of a feel-good story where he's helping a homeless veteran.
Oh, nice.
Who is on the streets, and his fellow homeless are disappearing. They're going off and they're disappearing and never coming back. And he's trying to find out. He hires Jarvis. In effect, doesn't hire him. He does it as pro bono because he's homeless and doesn't have any money. And Jarvis says, well, I'll look into it and see. And of course, it turns out to be something nefarious, of course, going on.
Well, that sounds fantastic. I know I just got into novellas myself, and I think generally they're anywhere from like 10 to 30,000. So it sounds like your second short story would actually be a novella. And I found it hard as well. Like I felt like it was a complete story, but then some people were like, oh, I wanted it to be a lot longer. It was too short. And I was like, well, that's right. A novella. Like it's not supposed to be much longer. And so
well, you want to leave them wanting more, right? So I guess that's not necessarily a bad thing. At least for me in a series, I do have characters that carry across through all the books. Some come and go, and it helps. They're written so they can be read as standalones, but there's a lot of characters that helps to read them in order if you can. It obviously gets spoilers sometimes. I try to explain, how they met this person, if they've met before and stuff. But you do, sometimes you want to leave them more, and hopefully you get them to, if they read a later one, maybe they'll go back and start at the beginning and, buy them all and all that. But yeah, a lot of people said that they wished it was a little bit longer, probably could have been a full book, but I felt like it was about right, at least for me. And I thought it would be a lot of filler otherwise,
Yeah. And that's a hard, I think line to walk is, as the author, like, okay, how much filler do I put in just to make it a book versus, really getting to the meat of the story and making it a really well done story. Because I think a lot of times you read some of those books and there's a lot of fluff that didn't necessarily need to be there.
Yeah, you don't want them to get bored and put the book down. Hopefully they try to read it through.
Yeah.
Keep them up all night reading if you've done your job correctly. That's what you hope for.
So I haven't written a lot of detective. Well, I haven't written any detectives, but I haven't even dabbled into the whole mystery suspense much. But I have a work in progress that has some of that. And I'm curious, how do you get your ideas for the different cases, and how do you set up how it's going to solve? I'm assuming that you don't fly by the seat of your pants when you write these.
Actually, I do a lot. I have a general... Yeah, I have a general idea when I first start a book on the storyline, but it oftentimes evolves as I write it. I mean, I kind of take it step for step through the book. I do use, Scrivenger, I think I'll probably pronounce that correctly, for help doing a little bit of storylining and character names and stuff, but I don't do real heavy outlines. I did the very first book I did, Tracking a Shadow. But after that, the next book, it just kind of read itself. Boy, good grammar on my part.
That's why we have editors, right?
That's why we have editors, yes. But it kind of wrote itself as I wrote it, and it actually was, the second book was actually two cases that came together with a big conclusion. Both cases kind of winding into one, so yeah, I generally have an idea, and I've always been one of these fantasy guys where it's always been in my head. Since I was a teenager, I've had story ideas. I wrote a lot of poetry when I was in high school, as I've mentioned many times. to deal with high school angst, teenage angst,
Right.
writing poetry and stuff. And the poetry kind of evolved into, well, these stories. And the ideas just kind of come to your mind, and I kind of get a small plot, and I say, okay, like the Tracking a Shadow was, okay, he's dealing with a woman who's being stalked. Okay, so where could that evolve from that? And that one I storylined a little bit more, but even then it didn't quite turn out the way I originally thought it was going to at first. And then the rest of the books have really written, I say they've written themselves. I'd like to think they wrote themselves, but I didn't. But a lot of times I'll write along and keep writing along, and I'll go, wow, I didn't really, it's taking me in this direction. So I'll just keep going that way, because it's, you know, kind of like how life is, right? You're walking down the street and you think you're going to turn right, and instead you might turn left for whatever reason, or driving or whatever. So the ideas come, they've always are there, and sometimes I may see other story ideas, or maybe see something in the paper. My latest book, actually the last full novel, Dead Man Code, talks about Russian and Chinese hackers.
Oh, well, that's pretty pretty newsworthy right now. So
right, and a tech company that's using them for nefarious, a fictional tech company using them for nefarious things. Those outlaws, or those criminals from those countries, are back in the next book that's coming out hopefully in January or February. And I've even talked a little bit about, Russia and getting involved in the elections, and things like that. So I throw a little bit of real world stuff in there and make it fictional. I won't name any real presidents or anything like that, or anybody on his staff or whatever's going on there. But
right.
Right. But, those ideas are just out there, and I think, well, this will make a good story, and I go from there. And sometimes I write them down, sometimes I don't.
Yeah, I'm not much of an outliner either, and I kind of envy the people who are, because I find myself sometimes writing and I get about 12,000 words in, and then I'm like, oh, this isn't working the way I thought it was going to work, and I need to rework it. And I'm like, man, I don't have enough time to write as it is, and I certainly don't have time to be rewriting. But I just can't sit down and plan the whole book, because I'm kind of like you. Like I have an idea, but then my books kind of take their own direction, and I'm like, I don't want to take away that creativity that happens when you're just writing. So
yeah, the characters are kind of taking you to where it's going. I mean, the characters obviously are in you, but when you write it, and when I write first person. I have some sections in the books where it's third person. In the new book, I do that a little bit, where it's third person from is a serial killer book. So from the serial killer, third person, seeing what he's doing. But, everybody says, is the detective you? Well, he kind of is me when I'm writing, because I'm writing, obviously, I'm seeing through his eyes. And where it takes me.
I have written in both as well, first person and third person. Do you find that you tend to write easier in one point of view than the other?
Well, for him, first person works. The 3 novels I wrote back in the 80s, I wrote them in third person. But I liked the first person in this case just because of the style. The noir style kind of begs for that a little bit. I'm a huge Robert B. Parker fan. If you know him, his Spencer novels, which are written in first person, which he did his Jesse Stone novels in third person, which is that. And my character is a little bit like that in a lot of ways. He's not nearly as tough, and he's not nearly as perfect. Spencer is not completely perfect, but he's pretty good. He has a steady relationship and stuff. My character is definitely not like that and stuff. But I like, at least for this character, it works well. I certainly would. I've had thoughts of going back on these 3 novels and updating them. They're so far out of date that I'd have to do a lot of updating on them.
Right.
Because it is a political type thriller, and it was dealing with the political aspects at the time, which was the drug cartel and things like that, which is not quite as prevalent now. It's now more terrorists. There's still the drug cartels are still big, but they don't seem to be as big in news.
Right.
So I'd probably have I probably have to update it quite a bit and do it. And for that one, it worked well for third person. For these novels, first person, it works well. And hopefully I'll have ideas of, some other books, and they may be third person.
So you've got lots of plans in your head then circling around.
Always. And I always feel like they're there and I got to get them down. To get them out of my head. I don't know if you have that experience too, but they just keep bugging you, and sometimes I'll get up in the middle of the night and write because I can't sleep because the thoughts are just going through my head. So you got to go downstairs and write and get them out of your head so you can go to sleep and go on to whatever else is next.
My husband and I actually got in a big discussion one day because he's like, you're always on your laptop writing. And I said, dude, you don't know what it's like. Like, I have 3 stories in my head right now, and I don't have time to write all 3 of them. And I'm like trying to write one until I get to a point where I can stop. And I was like, I can't sleep because there's these stories in my head. And he doesn't understand. I think it's a writer's thing. Like, it's very distracting. Sometimes I'll be at work and I'm like, man, I just want to go home and write. And one of these days I hope to write full time, but it's very distracting sometimes when I'm like, oh, I just need to go and I got to put them all out. And I wish I could do text to speak because I could kind of walk around, but I don't think out loud. I can't do it. And so I have to my fingers have to be on the keys and I have to be typing, and I just need more time in a day, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of like I harken back to sci-fi days. It's almost like there's a symbiote in you and you got to get it out of you, or it's in control of you until you release it. And in your case, you have 3 multiple personalities taking over, so that's probably even worse. So
it's real bad. And then a friend of mine was like, hey, we're going to do this new series. And I was like, oh, that sounds fun. And she's like, yeah, we're going to start in February. And I'm like, okay, so let me table these again, because there's no way I'm going to be able to write 3 books before February to be able to help her out with this project. So I'm like, oh man, I need more time in the day.
If you didn't have to sleep
or work,
it'd be okay, right?
If I didn't have to work, it would be much better.
No work, no sleep, all those things,
One of these days. And I think that's something that people don't realize is they think you can just sit down and write a book, and it doesn't, I don't know, for me, it doesn't bang itself out in like a day. It usually takes me a couple of weeks at least. And that's if I had a lot of time, but sometimes, as much as a couple of months to 6 months to a year. And what do you think is the hardest part of the writing process for you?
Well, I mean, obviously finding the time is the biggest thing. Obviously you got a family and everything else. You don't want to make them feel like you're ignoring them. Yes, and that's fairly hard. And my family's fairly understanding and stuff. And there are times, someone will walk in on me and I'm typing, and I kind of look at them and go, you're ruining my train of thought. So,
yep.
Obviously, if it's something important, I can usually pick up pretty good after that. But once you get on a roll, you generally don't want to stop if you don't have to. Running to the bathroom is secondary even when you're doing stuff like that. So it's you type, and you get the thought out, and then you run that thought out, and then you'll take a break, and then maybe you're on to the next thought or whatever. But time is the biggest thing. I'm currently not working, which is I had to take a break in July. I was actually in a motorcycle accident back in November of last year. Pretty bad one, and was knee beat up, and I was out of work for a couple of months. And I went through the physical therapy and went back to work part-time for a while and full-time, but it was really hard for me to get my health back in line. So I decided in July to take a break and stop working. Fortunately, financially wise, I'm able to do that. And I've been able to, because I couldn't write for a long time. I mean, in the hospital, you're taking, medication, you have to get off those opioids really quick because those things are bad for you, which thankfully I did not get. I was able to get off of those fairly quickly. But it was a hard thing. But now that I have the time, it's nice, but still there's other things. Even though I'm doing that, I had physical therapy and, there are other things, things to do around the house that I needed to do and stuff like that. So time is the biggest thing, and obviously time when there's no distractions, no life distractions. Obviously holidays, Out the holiday season, you know, it's family stuff, and it's a little harder. That's why I've finished this last book, and it's going off to the editor this week. I have one more beta reader I'm waiting to hear from, but the feedback's been positive. So be going off to her so I can worry about marketing and you know, buying Christmas presents and other things. And I'll take a break for a little while, even though I have started the next book already.
So let's talk a little bit about marketing, because that was another thing that I didn't really, when I first wrote my first novel, I was like, oh, I'm just going to write it and put it out there. And because I really felt called to write this, like, people are just going to buy it. And it sat for a long time. So what is the hardest part, do you think, about marketing?
Well, knowing what works and what doesn't work. I mean, it's really a crapshoot. I mean, you can post till you're blue in the face on Facebook. You can give away books, going to author events. I've had varying success for that, and of course those are expensive. And it's the cost of the marketing, because you don't make a lot of money. Because if you're independently on, say, Amazon, you know, they're taking, if the book's over $2.99, they take 35% of the money.
Yeah, 30
and
35%.
Yeah, and if, you know, you're a new author, it's not like you can charge, like, you know, the big shots, $13, $14 for an ebook. You just can't get away with that. So if you're doing $2.99, $3.99, then you run sales, and then the sales, you know, they take 70, I think, percent of it. If you do like a 99-cent or a free, you don't get anything. So yeah, it's knowing what works and doesn't work, and it's a lot of upfront money. So if you're lucky enough, and I do have someone that helps me, but you know, she doesn't help me for free. So you know, you pay that, and she you know, she puts together, you know, flyers and things like that, and then picking book events. And I've found I've done craft fairs here, you know, holiday craft fairs here in the Denver area. Aurora is where I live, which is a suburb. And I've done actually better at those than I've done at some of the book events I've gone to. And I'm doing another one here in a few weeks, right before Christmas. So, you know, getting the word out, because there are so many independent authors out there, and it's standing up, and you know, you're jumping up and down saying, look at me, and you know, there's of course 300 other authors who are doing the same thing, or thousands of authors doing the same thing.
Yeah, and I thought it would be a lot easier to at least get like into your local bookstores, you know, like in the area where you live. And I'm originally from a pretty small town in Texas that I'm going back to for Christmas. And so I called, because I write Christian romance. And so I called the Christian bookstores there, and I was like, hey, you know, I'm coming into town. I would love to do an author signing. And they were like, well, do we carry your books? And I said, probably not, but you can order them. But because they're Christian bookstores, they order only through approved lines, and you can only get approved if you have a publisher. And I was like, so I can't even like come in and do a book signing in my hometown, because they just don't, you know, you have to be with a pretty big publisher even to get looked at. And I was like, wow, they really don't make this easy.
No, they don't. And I've had a few local bookstores here. I've done a couple of small bookstores I've given stuff to, and they really didn't have much luck. And they work on consignment, and I provided the books to them. You know, they didn't even order them through. You know, all my books are through Amazon CrateSpace,
right,
stuff like that. But you know, they leave them up there for a while, and they don't sell. They turn around and send them back to you and say, sorry, it didn't work, and you know, they only have so much space.
Right.
So yeah, it's tough, and that's the thing that you want to try to do is hopefully get them in the bookstores. But of course, you know, like if you go to the big bookstores, which you know, all of those are struggling these days.
Right, that's true.
Amazon has really hurt the book market. They made it great for indie authors to get their books out there, but you know, they've lowered the price so much, and it's
and
a
I
real
think
challenge.
It's crazy that they take a 70% cut if you have your book lower than $2.99. I'm like, it doesn't change the way that you distribute the book. So I don't know why you take more money when it's less. And I don't know if you used Pronoun when Pronoun was up, but Pronoun had an agreement with Amazon to where you could still place your book less than $2.99 and still make the 70%, which was fantastic, because then you could run a 99-cent sale, or something like a series starter. Generally people put a little lower to try to get people to try a series, because they know, like, just like you said, new author, you're not going to spend $4 or $5, $7 or whatever. But then Pronoun is shutting down. And so it's like, okay, back to the drawing board of how do you get in and, still be able to make even if it's not a living, be able to make enough to cover your covers and your editors and, all that other stuff. So are you only on Amazon? Like, do you take advantage of Kindle Unlimited, or are you wide distributed through like iBooks and Google Play? And
the first two, the short story, The Case of Missing Bubblegum Card, and Tracking a Shadow, are now available on pretty much everybody. I took them off of KU because I'm now using those in some aspects for free, and you can't, because of the KU rules, you can't give away for free. So like Instant Freebie, I have Tracking a Shadow on Instant Freebie, and I'm doing some stuff there, hopefully to build mail lists and stuff, get people to sign up, things like that. The rest of the books are all Amazon only and on Kindle Unlimited. So book 7 will be out January, February. I probably will eventually start moving some of the other books away as well. I get some Kindle Unlimited reads, but it's a pittance of what Amazon pays you for it. Unless you get thousands and thousands of pages, and I don't get thousands and thousands of pages. Unfortunately, I wish I did. But
yeah,
maybe
I don't.
After this airs, yes. Then maybe
there you go.
Yeah.
I don't either. And I started my books in KU, and I actually ended up moving them, all except my, I had a couple of my kids' books in KU because those were the only things that people seem to read page-wise. But I have a friend who writes historical romances, and she gets thousands of pages read a month. And I'm like, wow, it's crazy. I think it's different for the genres, and historical works really well in KU, but my books never really did much in KU. And so I'm like, well, then I'm going to go and start putting them out, everywhere. And it's a slow process. But I think I've managed to build up to about 400 readers who are not on Amazon. So I'm like, woohoo, that's a start in the direction.
Right. So. Yeah, I use Drafted Digital is who I used to get out on the other, and they were pretty easy. I was pretty much able to take my Amazon and use that with a few modifications and get that out there. And
yeah, they're really good.
And Smashwords, all those, iBooks, all those things. So.
Yeah, I have them on Smashwords and Drafted Digital too. And then Google Play doesn't actually have a link with Drafted Digital, so I had to go to Google Play directly when Pronoun shut down. So it's
yes, I did them directly as well. Once I figured out how their system was, it was a little tough to figuring it out at first. It was like, wow.
They
seem very intuitive to me, but
for me either.
I'm an IT tech guy too, so that's my profession. So you would think I would be good with this stuff, but they had me a little baffled for a while until I finally figured it out.
Well, I couldn't even figure out where to go to ask them. Like, I was like, where do I upload a book? I was like looking out. I finally had to call their helpline, and I was like, here's what's happening. And they had to walk me through and like send me the direct links. And I was like, this is crazy. If I were, a brand new author just starting out, I'd be like, forget this. I'm not going to use Google Play. It was nice when it was linked with Pronoun, because again, it just went up, to all the places, but it's been challenging without it. Well, I tell you what, Randy, we are out of time, but I want to make sure and get your books linked. And so we'll make sure and have those in the article above. And I'd love for you to include your Insta freebie as well, so people can check out a book and sign up to your newsletter. And if you have, there we go. Oh, I love that cover too. That's great. If you have any Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or any place you want people to, stalk you, not stalk you, but author stalk you, then we'll make sure to include those as well, so that people can check you out and find some new books to read.
Absolutely. And the website is just rweir.net.
Hey, that's a pretty easy one to remember. And we'll link that above as well. Well, I wish you the best of luck in your upcoming release. I can't wait to see it. And for all of you viewers, we'll see you next week right here on Write the Worlds.